Welcome, everybody, to the Resilient Leadership Podcast, where everything we talk about is aimed at helping you to lead with a greater sense of calm, clarity, and conviction. And my name is Bridgette Tyre, and I am joined by the wonderful Irvine Nugent. Irvine, how are you?
I'm doing great today, Bridgette. Thank you so much. How about yourself?
I'm doing very, very well. You ready to dive into the secret sauce?
I am. I'm ready for some cooking today and exploring the secret sauce. Sounds good. You're just making me hungry just thinking about it.
Okay, so we're calling it secret. So why are we saying it's a secret sauce?
Great question. I think we call it secret because when it comes to thinking about what you need to be a great leader, especially in times of anxiety or disruption,
Yeah.
or perhaps leading a new activity, or putting yourself on the line, or just even thinking in the last 2 years, leading through the kind of disruption, what comes to mind first is not necessarily what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we're calling it secret,
Mhm.
because it lies, I think, below the surface and is not initially obvious.
Yes.
So maybe we should put the listeners out of their curious minds, although we just talked about curiosity last time.
Yeah.
But what are some of those secrets, and why are they important?
Yeah. Okay. So here they are. And you know what I love about them is they're so easy to remember because they each begin with the word stay. So the secret sauce is during times of disruptive change and you're leading it, stay calm, stay the course, and stay connected. Now that sounds a lot simpler than it is. So we're going to unpack what those mean and what they look like. But the bottom line is that any anxious family, team, or organization craves a well differentiated leader. And Murray Bowen was the scientist that really came up with this term self differentiated person, right? And then Ed Friedman, his protege, applied it to leadership. So self differentiated leaders are like self differentiated companies, right? Companies that are well differentiated stand apart from their competition. Like they know who they are, and they have clarity around it and they have consistency around that messaging. And well differentiated leaders are the same. They know who they are.
Yeah.
They act in ways that are very consistent with that understanding of self, right?
Yeah.
So what that looks like in action, though, is sometimes a little bit murky. So that's why we've got these 3 secret ingredients. So we're going to unpack each one of them. So let's start with the first one. And Irvine, before you unpack what it means to stay calm, I just want to remind or tell our listeners that these 3 ingredients go into making up, the leadership sauce. They're not separate, discrete activities. It's not like that. Right.
Yeah.
But to talk about them, we're going to pull them apart, but they're really practiced all together. So Irvine, what is this notion, this ingredient of staying calm? What's that about?
Yeah. So when we look at staying calm, what's interesting about that, we want to further break it down into 2 elements. And that is when we mean stay calm, we want to embody that calmness and we want to communicate. So when you think about it, someone can say, and try and remain very calm and talk very calmly. But we know just from the energy we're feeling that the last thing they are is calm. And so therefore, that's why it's important that this embodiment. So first of all, that means that the leader or the parent or the team leader have done some work. They have, first of all, looked inside and recognize their own anxiety, recognize their tendency, their reactions in this moment, and they have calmed themselves down. They have taken action to kind of swap around the anxiety with a calmness. And then from that comes the communication of that calmness. And, the communication of that calmness is this calming effect on the whole system. And you made reference, to Mary Bowen, and one of the things that came out in some of the research was that when one self-differentiated person is calm, it impacts not just themselves, but it impacts the whole system.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about emotional contagion before.
Right.
There is a little contagion going on here, and this calmness is caught by other people, and it impacts the whole system.
Oh, yeah, in ways that we can not fully appreciate, right? And
Yeah,
so a calm presence is felt even by parts of the system that aren't directly connected to you,
yeah,
which is interesting because that's how systems work. Yeah.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
and so Friedman was the one. Friedman was a protege of Murray Bowen, and I believe he was the one that coined the term "be a step down transformer."
Mm,
And I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, "Bing, bing, bing, bing!" Like that is such a useful metaphor
yeah.
for what we're talking about when we say stay calm, because what we do not mean is that you're always in a zen like state, right? Free
Mm-mm.
of passion, free of emotion. No, 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 no.
No, no, no.
That's not what we mean. We're talking about being more thoughtful, and we're talking about being less reactive.
Yeah.
But Irvin, share with folks this notion of what a step down transformer is.
So I remember, just like you, it kind of went a bing, 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 bing for me. But
Yeah.
one of the images that came up was actually when I was younger and traveling to the US for the first time. And I remember I went with my sister, and my sister forgot her hairdryer. And so she bought one here in the States and then went back home to Ireland, plugged it in, and the sparks were flying. And so I learned in a very visceral way that voltage is different in different countries. And so this idea that if it was going to work, you needed a transformer. And so, really in life, a transformer is able to drive up or down voltage. And so this step down. So I love this image, this image, because in any situation where there is anxiety, there is energy. We think about it as energy. And what a
Yes.
leader is able to do is to take some of that energy and act as a step down transformer to
Right.
bring down some of the anxiety and to help there to be calm in this
Mm-hmm.
nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And just as you said, that's not just someone walking in and going
Yes.
and acting. This is really about someone who's able to focus on the facts, someone who is to bring clarity sometimes,
Mm.
when there's a lot of confusion. Someone, one of the things that happened, we talked about it before, is that we've some over functioning or maybe under functioning, and so this person is able to clarify what are the roles, what's the responsibilities,
Yeah.
what should people be doing.
Yep.
And they're able to, I think, create a vision which is longer term. So one of the
Mm.
things when we're in crisis mode, we can only think of the here and now,
Yeah.
and so they're able to bring a longer term. And then the other thing, which I think is great, is that I think there's humor around it as well. Because
Yeah.
one of the things that happens when there's so much anxiety, everything is so serious.
Yep.
And I think there's a little bit of levity there, and they're able to
Yes.
kind of to joke a little bit, to bring humor, to make a
Yeah.
little lightness of something that can be very heavy.
Yeah. Even in like a really tense moment, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And even just realizing that we can't take ourselves too seriously, even if
yeah,
we're involved in a serious endeavor,
yeah,
because as
yeah,
soon as we start doing that, laughter is gone. I
yeah,
mean, again, one of the signs of a highly anxious team or family
yeah,
is they've lost the ability to laugh.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
You seem like you have a really good sense of humor to me. I've always experienced you that way. And I would say there's a lightheartedness about you.
yeah,
Do you think
yeah.
that's true of
Oh,
you?
absolutely. Yes. And, I think, many people know that I grew up in Northern Ireland. I grew up in the midst of conflict and tension
Yes.
and sides, pulling themselves apart. And Northern Ireland is known for great humor.
Yeah.
And I think, there is this ability to interject humor in the midst of great tension as a
Hmm.
way of relieving some of that anxiety. So I think it's part of, naturally came in my DNA, but it's
Yeah.
certainly something that I've used. Yeah.
Yeah. This is reminding me of a leader that I coached many years ago. And he was very buttoned up
Mhm.
and very professional and very serious. And I had learned this about him because I had met him a couple times. And then he said the following thing to me. He said, in my family, I'm the funny guy. And I remember thinking, you are? And he goes, yeah, everybody relies on me for jokes. Everybody
Uh,
relies on me at the family gatherings to bring some lightness to it.
mhm.
And I was so curious about this. And so I asked him, I said, well, that is very interesting. why don't you bring that same lightheartedness and
Mm,
playfulness to work? And I can't remember if I told this story on another episode, but it so struck me. He said, "Oh, I didn't think it was appropriate to bring
mm,
it to work." So
yeah,
then that invited a conversation about the leader's role in creating an environment in which everybody can do their best thinking.
yeah,
And people can't do that if they're jacked up really high on anxiety. So
totally.
the leaders got to manage their own anxiety and then bring the anxiety level down in the group just enough for people to do their best thinking, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the good news is we don't have to be free of anxiety. We just have to be a little bit less anxious than the people around us, right?
And Bridget, that brings up to me a memory of an example of me of someone who really embodied. I saw doing that so well.
Mm.
I'm thinking of a membership organization, and it had gone through really a tough couple of years. Membership was down. The leader was not doing a
Mm.
great job. Some decisions were very poor. There was poor communication, and you could just feel the tension
Mm.
in both the staff and the members. And then a this person resigned, a new person came in as CEO. And I remember the first thing that I was struck by in the first communication message they sent out was just this beaming smile,
Mm.
which just communicated, I want to be here.
Oh,
I want to be here in the midst of this. I know it's not easy, but I want to be here. And I remember there was the calmness just resonated even through the video,
hmm.
and there was a clarity and a consistency. They talked about some longer term goals. That this is going
Yeah.
to come out. There was an ability to recognize things are not doing good, but we're in the midst of clarifying people's roles, responsibilities. There was a humor there. It was almost
Wow.
an embodiment of what we've talked about. And
Yeah.
and in reality, it took a while. It wasn't. And that's another thing I think for people to realize. This is not an instant fix.
Oh, no.
But 6 months later, the visceral difference has been really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a great example. And yeah, it's not an instant fix, and it's an ongoing
Yes.
practice, right?
Yeah.
That we're working on staying calm, because as soon as we've figured out one situation, another one comes our way, and people get anxious about that challenge, right? So it's
Yeah.
an ongoing
Totally.
practice
Yeah.
of staying calm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I liked how you said we got to do our inside work, because the first step towards being a less anxious presence is managing your own anxiety. And most people in leadership positions are there because they're pretty good at staying calm. But as long as you have a beating heart, anxiety affects you too.
Mhm.
And when
Yep.
you say or do something from an anxious place and you're not aware that you're saying or doing it from an anxious place, that's what really gets people, set up on edge. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So that's our first ingredient. I think it's time to introduce our second ingredient now,
Yeah.
which we mentioned was staying the course. So Bridget, what do we mean by staying the course, and why is it important?
Yeah. So staying the course is about leading with conviction,
Mm,
right? And it's sort of in contrast to what we were just talking about, this notion of dialing it down, right? And
mm,
bringing a lighter touch and focusing people on facts, and making sure people see the longer term game and all that kind of stuff. Leading with conviction is about being bold. It's
mm,
about a willingness to take risks. It's a willingness to be vulnerable, because you know that when you do take a bold action, or you take a risk, or you take a tough stand, you're probably going to get some pushback, you
mm,
know, and you're going to be vulnerable to failure. You're going to be
mm.
vulnerable to ridicule. So do you have the emotional fortitude to do that? And I think it's also about making sure that instead of being driven by the emotional pressures of the day, you're constantly returning to your principles, that you're making principle based decisions, not emotionally based decisions. Now, let's face it, we all make emotionally based decisions. We're emotional beings, but it's not the only driving force. When you're leading with conviction and you're staying the course, you are clear about the principles upon which you are making those tough decisions and those tough calls.
Yeah.
And I think it requires a fair amount of courage.
Yeah, and it also strikes me again, staying the course sounds uh, wonderful and easy, and yet it's
Yeah.
hard. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm wondering, what do you think is the hardest part about that? Either, in the leaders that you've coached, what is the hardest part about leading with conviction?
I think it's probably when you take that initial stand, right? Like you gather
Mhm.
your courage and you say, okay, I'm going to tell them that we need to do this, or I'm going to have this difficult conversation, or I'm going to whatever. I'm going to speak up. And you do it, and then you get silence, or you get
Mhm.
somebody saying,
Mhm.
that's not the right thing,
Yeah.
When that pushback comes,
Mhm.
can you hold your ground? Because it's very easy to kind of have that initial tall spine, but then when the punch comes, we go like this, we
Yeah.
collapse our spine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why it's called staying the course,
Yeah.
because it's not the initial act, it's can we continue to stay the course in a principled way. And that's what Ed Friedman called the keys to the kingdom, because
Mm.
any good leader will at some point experience sabotage.
Yeah.
And that's because you're disrupting the status quo. And can
Yeah.
you still lead well in the
Yeah.
midst of that? What do
And
you
in
think?
many ways, I think it's to be expected. I mean, it's not that I think that sabotage is kind of, like some shock and surprise. It's like when you take stands and you stay the core. This is to be expected. You are going to confront people who are just not with you.
It's part of the job description, but we don't
Yeah.
tell people that because maybe they wouldn't take the job. It's
And
like,
that's
would you like this promotion? And by the way, you're going to get hit with some sabotage.
yeah. Yeah. So now, what's one thing that strikes me then, Bridget, is so you take the stand. You have some people who are trying to sabotage, or even the silence, or else people push back. So, and part of it is staying the ground, but is there also a risk of going too far and becoming so defensive? It strikes me you can become too rigid then. So,
Yes.
is there a balance in there, or is there a danger of becoming too rigid?
Oh, yeah. There totally is. It's not about being rigid. So it's not like my way or the highway,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, it's, in other words, when we do take a clear stand, or we make a tough decision, or we decide to go in this direction, we have gathered input and we have really listened to people,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And we've been informed. So
Hmm.
while we might not conform to everything we've heard,
Hmm.
people know we've heard them. So that's
Hmm.
that's number one. Do people know you've heard them?
Yeah.
And then I think you said the word defensive, and that's
Mm.
key. Do you have the capacity to take a tough stand, or to share your opinion, particularly if you know it's going to disagree with other people, without getting defensive and without
Mhm.
needing to win? Like,
Mhm.
like, okay, you need to agree with me,
Mhm.
right? Even
Yeah.
leaders, you can't will people
Yeah.
to agree with you. You can't will people to adopt your plan. Doesn't work. If it did,
Yeah.
it would be a lot easier to be a leader.
So then in that case, so if a leader sets out kind of a vision, et cetera, and the team don't agree and there's no meeting of the minds, where does that leave it? Where does that leave things? Where does it leave the team?
Yeah, well, hopefully not everybody disagrees with you, but
Yeah.
inevitably people will. And
Yeah.
I think remembering that when you lead with conviction and you're clear about where you stand, it invites other people to get clear about where they stand, right?
Yeah.
Might not be with you, it might be kind of with you, and they need just a little bit more encouragement to follow. But that's a good outcome,
Mhm.
because really what you want is people to be choosing to opt in or out, right?
Yeah.
Of that decision, of that plan, of that project, of that vision, because you're so clear
Mhm.
and you've invited input, right? And you've listened, and they then decide. I mean, people are always deciding for themselves whether they will or won't follow you,
Yeah.
but you want them to decide earlier on and feel like they're making the choice about that.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, you can't necessarily win over everybody, and nor do you have to.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you do have to be willing to clearly take stands and do it at the risk of displeasing others. And I don't know about you, Irvin, but that's a muscle that I still have to build every day.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. One of the, I think what, as I reflect back in my years of leadership, one of the most difficult things that I had to manage.
Yeah, because you've mentioned earlier on this podcast that you're a pleaser. You
Mhm.
want people to be happy. So
Yeah.
I imagine a lot of people listening can
Yeah.
relate to that, and they're in leadership positions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it brings up a point we met at the very beginning of the podcast. We said, these are not separate ingredients.
That's right.
And so, I found the staying calm very easy,
Yeah.
but this particular ingredient was much more difficult for
Yeah.
me.
And I bet
Mm.
the next ingredient was easy for you too, or
Yes.
easier. And so
Easier. Yes.
that's the staying connected piece. Now, um, it is interesting what you can tell already is more in your wheelhouse and more challenging. But talk about what staying connected is and what it was like for you.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because the third one then is called staying connected. So we've talked about staying calm, staying the course, but at the same time as well as a leader, we have to stay connected to the people that we're leading.
Hmm.
And just think about it, if you're in an organization, in a team, in a family where there is anxiety, real anxiety, or people are being reactive, etc. That's difficult to stay connected to. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, there was a team that I was on about 5 or 6 years ago, and there was just a very anxious person who just everything. And I remember it was so difficult. I mean, I could feel my body wanting to move back because it was so difficult to stay connected, to be in that presence all the time.
Yeah.
And so therefore, as a leader as well, when there's a lot of anxiety around it, it is difficult to stay connected to that, to be open to it. Now,
Yeah.
there's a phrase that we use. There's a balance here. And the balance we're looking at is you want to be close enough to
Hmm.
influence the situation, but distant enough to lead. And there's a paradox. There's a polarity in that of staying connected, because at the same time we want close, caring relations. We want people to really feel that we are building trust, and that I mentioned there about that leader, wanting to be there, that we want to be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so therefore, we want a closeness there, but we don't want it too close, because if it's too close, you become so enmeshed, you become part of it,
Yeah.
and you become part of the anxiety.
And
And
part of
then
the
at the same
gang, right? Like,
part, yeah, you're part of the gang.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then at the same time, we don't want to be too distant, where people see you as almost a little aloof. And well, you say these nice things, but really, you're really not present with us.
Yeah.
You really don't care about us. And so you're really not connected to us. So there is a balance there, and with that, it's nuanced, and there's not one right answer to this.
Right.
It's kind of measuring this as you go along.
And I'm thinking about how when you were leading and you mentioned there was that one highly anxious individual and you went like this,
Yes,
you pulled
yes,
back. Well, not only is the balance not static, right?
yeah,
But it's different for different stakeholders, right? So
yes,
with that person, you were too distant.
yes,
You withdrew as a way to
yes,
manage your own anxiety.
yes,
But you might have been in perfect balance with other people on the team.
yes,
Yeah. So it's a matter of checking in with ourselves to say, where am I striking that balance where I really am close enough that they know I care. They know
mm,
I have their back, right? They know
mhm,
I'm
mhm,
present and accounted for, but they
yeah,
also know I am not one of the gang.
yeah,
And they
yeah,
also can see me as a leader apart from the group.
yeah. And it strikes me as well, Bridget, as well. There are patterns in her life, and I think I mean, I know in general that situation I brought up was me kind of pulling back, but
Yeah.
what is more common for me is that I do get involved. I do get enmeshed, and I think my tendency is to, because I'm so good at listening, I'm so good at connecting with people, that people then will come to me. And for me, the difficult thing is really having that dividing line of creating a little bit distance. And
Yes.
I think, it's really important for us to reflect upon that, kind of look back at our example when when we're with people who are in situations of high anxiety, what is their tendency? Is there a tendency to kind of want to push back?
Yes.
Or is there a tendency wanting to move in where we
Yeah.
just become enmeshed in it?
Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of people listening could probably relate to either side of that, right? Like
Yeah.
they can see that sometimes they withdraw. They
Yeah.
they distance themselves from anxious relationship systems. And
Yeah.
other people can probably relate to becoming enmeshed, right?
Yeah.
To becoming part of kind of just one big ball of anxiety together. At least we're all in this together. We said at the beginning this notion that these secret ingredients are what constitute being a well differentiated leader, right? A leader that stands apart. And I'm now remembering this example of a leader I worked with who she was managing a large hospital in a big city that was going through massive change. And
Mm.
when I say massive, it was on a scale that was just so significant that everybody was pissed off and everybody was anxious. I
Mm.
mean, from the people who came in and cleaned the hospital to the COO on up, and she was tasked with leading this change. And a year after successfully shepherding them through phase one of this massive change, she was promoted 2 levels above that to an even bigger leadership responsibility that was system wide. Now she was going to be managing several hospitals in a large system. And as I listened to her talk about that year-long stint as a leader, I could hear it. You know what she was doing? She was staying calm. She was being thoughtful. She was managing her own anxiety. She was bringing focus and clarity and sometimes humor so that people could really think their way through. She was definitely staying the course. She made some difficult decisions. She was bold. She was brave. She was courageous. She was principled. And she definitely stayed connected, even to a couple of people who tried to overthrow her.
Mm. Yeah.
So I named it for her, and I said, "This is why they have reached out to you to
Yeah.
promote you."
Yeah.
Yeah. So she definitely stood out from the crowd. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And that's a wonderful example of the balance of all three as well.
Hmm.
So, Bridget, before we close today, we always try and have a little practice. Have you a practice that might help us really embody and think about these three ingredients?
Yeah. So, Irvin, your creativity is rubbing off on me. And so I
Mm.
was trying to think of a practice that would be, tied to this notion of secret sauce.
Mm.
And so here's the idea that just like if you were making a sauce for, let's say, guests were coming to dinner and you're making a sauce and you're putting all the ingredients in a bowl, before you served it, you would taste it, to check out, like, do I need a pinch more of this or a pinch more of that? It's a taste test. Similarly, right? The practice we're leaving with you is a taste test, and it's
Mm.
same 2 steps. So check in with yourself as a leader and think about these 3 stay calm, stay the course, stay connected. And which one do you think right now your team, your organization, your family needs more of from you? And then for the next 3 weeks, just very thoughtfully and very deliberately practice bringing more of that ingredient to the mix
Mm.
and see what happens, right? And then start it all over again and check
Mm.
in again and see which ingredient needs to be brought in a little bit more while they're all three working together. Just like you said, Irvin, you knew which one at that point in time was the missing ingredient. Well, maybe you didn't know then, but you know now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So, I mean, I think that's what we've been talking about today, those three ingredients: stay calm, stay the course, stay connected, and to this ability to kind of know which one is needed a little bit more of. And so we want to thank you for listening to us today. We've been having some great feedback, and you seem to be enjoying these episodes. As always, if you think someone could benefit from a particular message of an episode, please feel free to spread the word and to share the episode with them. In our next episode, we are going to examine charisma And the title of the episode is Busting the Charisma Myth. Bridgette, thank you so much for joining us today.
It was a pleasure as always.
Thank you so much, and we will see you all in the next episode. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.